What's up, everybody? Hey, how you doing? Hope you're well. This is Jordan Tremaine with another book review, and today we're going to talk about a book I thought that was really interesting, had a lot of good points, and brought together two ideas that I think are pretty fundamental to basically how almost everything on the surface of this earth looks. You may not have heard of this book, but I know you've heard of some of the things that have become popular in the world because of this book, and it is none other than Richard Dawkins' bestseller, The Selfish Gene. Okay, so The Selfish Gene is a really long book, and Richard Dawkins, he's a zoologist dude, so he's looking at Darwinism and how different animals act and how they breed and their behavior strategies and survival strategies if they work together with other animals, plants, insects, viruses, like living stuff, and viruses, because viruses are not alive technically. But this book, The Selfish Gene, talks a lot about this idea of Darwinism, or survival of the fittest. If you've heard of that concept, often it's called evolution, and it's challenging this idea of what is evolving. When we're talking about survival of the fittest, it's asking this question: the fittest what? And I think the popular idea outside of this book is to think like it's humans, it's birds, it's cats. The survival of the fittest is talking about the individual. And so I'm trying to survive against other people and lions and tigers and bears and stuff. And this book is making a conjecture that the unit of survival, when we're talking about survival of the fittest and evolution, it's not humans that are evolving, it's not cats or birds or fish that are evolving. That's not the thing we should be focused on when we're thinking about evolution. What we should be focused on, rather than the individual, is the genes inside of that individual. So, not to get too much into it, because this starts going into genetics and it can get kind of complicated. This book review is not trying to teach you lessons, it's trying to tell you about the book. But when it's talking about survival of the fittest, when it's talking about Darwinism and evolution, it's saying genes, or like the kind of stuff that's in your DNA, that's the stuff that can actually repeat and go on generation by generation exactly the same. Because like if you have a son or daughter, if you have a kid, if a cat has a kid, it's not an exact copy. But if DNA copies, it is an exact copy. And what we are as people are kind of these robots or these houses for DNA to live and find ways to spread and replicate. Ultimately, the idea of the selfish gene, or the selfish gene theory as it's called in this book, is that the unit of evolution, the unit of Darwinism, has to be a replicator. It has to be something that can repeat itself exactly. And humans cannot do that. You cannot make offspring that are exactly like you, because they're a mix of you and your partner. And the same for almost every species. But genes can do this. And genes over time evolve to work together with other genes to mutate and have different traits or different effects on the bodies that they live in order to tweak the formula to make people more suited for their environment. And that's where we get survival of the fittest. That's where we get evolution, by different genes working together to replicate themselves. This is a really interesting idea, and Richard Dawkins goes into a lot of detail and a lot of different examples using different animals and species in the animal kingdom to explain this, and even insects and stuff like that, where he's making this argument, since genes are the thing that are trying to evolve or involved in survival of the fittest, that ultimately all our behaviors and all of our strategies for replicating and having longevity, having kids and stuff, is about protecting our genes. And he goes into why that can influence our behavior, and why maybe we want to take care of our kid more than we want to take care of our brother, or why why we care more about family members than we care about strangers, because family members might share more common genes with us than strangers. So if we're trying to actually replicate and keep alive our genes rather than ourselves, I might actually care about family more, because that's the whole point of me being alive, is to have the survival of the fittest in terms of my genes. And I share genes with my family, with my brother, with my son, and things like that. So there's a lot of really interesting examples. It brings up a lot of different situations, like ants, how ants work in their ant colonies, how bees work in hives, and all these different examples from the standpoint of looking at how they're acting, how they're behaving as through the lens of the selfish gene theory. And it's very interesting. I think this is something that's become very widespread. This is a widespread idea in the scientific community, and Richard Dawkins has contributed heavily to this idea of evolution and Darwinism through the selfish gene theory, and I thought it was cool. I do think there were kind of a lot of examples, and the book kind of trudged on a little bit more than I would like, but all the examples were interesting, and I don't think that any was a waste. It just seemed like kind of a long-ish explanation for the idea for me personally, but I did appreciate a lot of it, and I got some insight, and it helped me think about, oh, maybe retooling or having a different perspective on why things in my life are happening a certain way, because maybe if this is true, maybe if people are trying to preserve their genes or have these different strategies, because they talk about how people behave and how people establish their position in society and in reality and in nature through the lens of the selfish gene theory, but it goes through kind of derivations of different strategies and why people or animals or insects would do these things. And if a situation changed, if a new person got introduced to the system, maybe that would change the behavior, maybe that would change the strategy. So I really appreciated that. That was really cool. And then for me personally, the best, craziest, most good part about this book was the last couple of chapters, because by and large, the main part of the book is about Darwinism, evolution, survival of the fittest in terms of replicators, because I was saying it's not about the individual, it's about things that can replicate, and in this case, we're talking about genes being the replicators that survival of the fittest is applied to. The vast majority of this book is talking about genes as replicators in nature for natural selection. But then the last couple of chapters, Richard Dawkins says, well, evolution works on replicators. And what if genes are not the only replicators that exist? And he goes out to put this idea that something called a meme is also a replicator. And while genes, which are inside of our DNA, they're little physical things made out of proteins and stuff, they go through this natural selection process. A meme, which is an idea, which is similar to the thing that we call a meme today, like on Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. It's like a single unit of idea. Like a gene is like a single unit of genetics, and a meme is like a single unit of ideas. While a gene goes through a natural selection process, because a gene exists in nature. A meme, which is more like an idea, it doesn't really physically exist. It goes through a cultural selection process because it exists in our minds and it's a product of the culture. But since it replicates very similarly to genes, and we can call it a replicator, just maybe not through natural selection because it's not in nature, it's inside of culture. If you look at it through the lens of evolution and cultural selection, ideas work basically the same way. And memes can get spread, they can get mutated, they can evolve, they can work together with other ideas, and all the concepts that Richard Dawkins took so much time to go through in the first part of the book, talking about the selfish gene, he applies to what if instead of genes we were talking about ideas. And he calls this branch of science memetics. I think memetics is ridiculously interesting, and it's the whole reason that I wanted to read this book. And I'm glad I did, because it broke it down really well, and I think it's an idea that is worth knowing for everybody. I will admit it's a little bit confusing, especially if you haven't read the book, because the book is like 500 pages or something like that, and it takes a lot of time to make sure it's explaining it in different ways and using different examples so that you can get the idea. And I'm making like some 15-minute video here to try to stuff like, I don't know, 10, 15 hours of audiobook into like one little review. So if it doesn't make too much sense or it sounds a little weird, don't worry, because it's a really big idea and it takes a while to explain. But if it's interesting to you, go on YouTube, type in like what is memetics, or look it up a little bit, check it out on Wikipedia or something like that. And I think after a couple of videos, if you don't get it right now, it'll click a little bit, and it's something that's really interesting. I think it's worth talking about, and it can help you understand why ideas are so catchy, or why some ideas work and some ideas don't, or why truth is not the thing that makes ideas stick in people's heads. Because a virus may not be good for you, but it sticks to people. And this idea may not be good for you, it may not be truth, it may be like a viral idea, like it goes viral, but it may not be because it's true. It may just because it's evolved and become very good at what it does, which is replicating, going into different people's minds, going into my mind, and then replicating in another person's mind, and another person's mind. And it may not be about truth at all. It may be about survival of the fittest when we're talking about ideas. So I thought this book was cool. It expressed and explained things in really objective terms that were easy to understand if you're patient enough to sit down and listen to it or page through it in the real book. So I think it's worth a read for everybody. It's a very important idea, I think, and in the case of genetics or memetics, both ideas I think are super relevant. So I would highly encourage people that are interested to read this book and start conversations about it. Talk to different people, look at different sources, and see what you really think is true and what's not true, and what you can get for yourself. Because just reading books or talking to people or watching the news and accepting everything you hear, I think that's a really quick path to getting confused. And I'm not saying the stuff in this book is not true, but I'm saying if you're going to try and read it, try and validate it yourself. Try and think about it yourself and see if it really makes sense to you. Because I think that's where the benefit is, when you really understand it, not just you read it and you accepted it. So the book is The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. I think this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year, even though it was longer than I liked it to be. The explanations in here and the examples and the vocabulary that they used, I think were so good that, I don't know, just like I get to keep digging back on what I learned and use it in my life, and it's so interesting to think about and talk to other people about that I really appreciate this work. So this has been Jordan Tremaine with another book review. I highly recommend this book, audiobook, which is how I listen to it, or bookie book, where you like have pictures and you scroll through. You do that too. But this is a good one. I highly recommend it, and I will talk to you guys later. Have a good day.